So, is expanding our airport capacity in line with our net zero targets? Well, let's speak to Finlay Asher, who's a former aircraft engineer who now campaigns Safe Landing, a group of aviation workers aiming to reduce the climate impact of air travel. Finlay, thank you very much for joining me. The Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, was on the airwaves today saying essentially there's no tension between airport expansion and fighting climate change. Is he correct?
I think that's a very difficult statement to make. You've seen this tension actually just a couple of days ago with Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, saying that if there is going to be expansion, it needs to be within carbon budgets. Now, the UK government have independent climate advisors, the Climate Change Committee. They've stated on numerous occasions that they don't think any airport expansion is consistent with meeting climate targets and carbon budgets. We're talking about really when this is going to kind of get to a big pass is next decade. So we really need to reduce our fossil fuel use by 75% by the middle of next decade, sorry. And that's when these airports, if expansion does go ahead, they're going to be opening up. And it's going to be then really difficult to get this level of air traffic within those carbon budgets.
In the same news bulletins this morning, we're hearing that human-driven climate change had partly caused the LA wildfires. But actually, when it comes down to it, this country is desperately looking for economic growth. How do you try to balance that with those environmental ambitions?
Well, exactly. I mean, my group, I'm an aerospace engineer, but we've got airline pilots, air traffic controllers. Many of the pilots in our group have flown over wildfires in Europe. They've seen the ice melting in the Alps in the winter. These are, where we go on holiday, the very destinations being really impacted by the climate crisis. We think there is a way through this. We need to set carbon budgets for each airport. And they can only expand and increase their air traffic if they stick within that. We also see a real positive future and an area where the UK could really pioneer and develop its economy by investing in the future of flight. Zero carbon aircraft, electric, hybrid aircraft. These are going to be smaller though, they're going to be shorter range and carry less passengers. And fundamentally, we also probably need really different airports. So there's a real question here over the airports that have been announced today: Gatwick, Luton, Heathrow. They're massive airports, long-haul international hubs. Do we actually need a more distributed network of zero-carbon aircraft hubs? Just think about it from a Scottish perspective. Imagine flying from Edinburgh or sort of Glasgow over to Belfast or over to Scandinavia. That's the sort of flight that could be done and the sort of connections we could increase in a zero-carbon way. That would also reduce air pollution and noise for communities around airports. And that's kind of been one of the big political sticking points, is these impacts to communities. So I think there is a way through this, but it's really different from what's being proposed here. And I think that's a point I want to make. We have multiple choices, political choices we can make. And there isn't necessarily just kind of falling back on the old school thinking of bigger airports, more flights, more economic benefit.
Right.
It is not necessarily true.
And in a sense, with you explaining your group's aims and the multidisciplinary approach in your group with lots of different professions in the aircraft industry, and you're looking for that different way, but perhaps how realistic is that when you know that people still want to travel, people still want to go on holiday? Is it realistic to look for that kind of real change in how we use aircraft and airports?
Well, I think the question is do we want to be able to travel in 15, 20 years' time? Do we want some of the coastal beaches that we visit to still be there? Some of the natural wonders, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, the Amazon rainforest. The reason why we enjoy going places and experiencing it and some of the cultures there, we want that to still exist in the future for us and for future generations. So what we're talking about is how can we get connectivity, but get it within environmental limits. And I think the answer isn't business as usual expansion of fossil fuel powered long haul large aircraft. It's doing something different. And if you think about Tesla in the US 15 years ago, they thought differently. They invested in a different technology, didn't have the same range to begin with, but now they're one of the fastest growing automakers. And that's how you kind of seize economic opportunity. You need to think ahead and think about how the world is going to change over the coming decade.
Well, Finlay Asher from Safe Landing, very interesting to speak to you. Thanks very much for taking part in the programme this afternoon.
Thank you.